During this presentation, I intend to analyse how far-right movements in Germany use women's rights to advance their personal anti-immigration agenda. Focusing particularly on media representations and political campaign posters, I will delve into the techniques used to portray this agenda and why. With the backdrop of recent social justice movements and collections of experiences of sexual violence through hashtags such as #MeToo and the German Aufschrei, together with recent horrifying mass sexual assaults and rapes in Cologne, Hamburg and Stuttgart, I have decided to explore how the right-wing media and far-right movements such as the AfD portray these events with the purpose of convincing individuals of a particular political persuasion. I have chosen to analyse articles from Bild, which is Germany's largest and most popular tabloid newspaper and happens to favour right-wing tendencies. As Bild reaches such wide scope to most members of society, I think it is fair to say the political bias present has a major power to influence. Following the right-wing media's reactions to these mass sexual assaults, the issue of using these incidents to incite xenophobic rhetoric is also something that has been raised as unacceptable by the left in Germany and globally. This has been widely discussed with the use of the hashtag Sonams Loss. An activist group developed this hashtag into a movement against sexual violence and racism, and its petition received over 11,000 signatures in just 1 week. It is clear to me how events like these in contemporary German culture have the potential to cause a rise in far-right populist movements, as well as anti-immigration, even anti-Islamic verbalization. I will explore this issue through 3 separate frameworks. Firstly, which techniques the right-wing media use to promote their anti-immigration agenda and how this is effective. Secondly, why the far-right movements are not feminists and are not using incidents of sexual violence for a feminist benefit. This section will be answered with 3 arguments. And finally, to expose the anti-feminist trends that are indeed present within these articles. As you can see in Article 1 from Bild, which addresses the sex attacks in Hamburg, the journalist suggests that most of the perpetrators were young foreigners, probably North African. As you can see in Article 1 from Bild, which addresses the sex attacks in Hamburg, the journalist suggests that most of the perpetrators were young foreigners, probably North African. The journalist of Article 2, which also featured in Bild, mentions that those accused of the Hamburg sex attacks were 3 refugees between the age of 18 and 26. The reason why the ethnicity, immigration status, and age of these men were emphasised was to purposely cast them as the other in society, as a way to stress that these people are the biggest threat to the German nation. This is as if their otherness was an intrinsic reason as to why they would commit crimes of sexual violence. I think it is obvious if this was a German white male, his ethnicity and nationality would not have been mentioned. The journalist of As Diana Molinari and Anders Nergard suggest, this is an act of exclusionary racism by focusing on the racialized other as a threat to the nation. They, far-right movements, aim to expel racialized others from the national body by portraying male immigrants, metaphorically and literally, as rapists of the nation. This is particularly relevant here as the event itself involves acts of sexual violence and rape. This fits particularly well with the right-wing discourse concerning immigrants. Of course, these inherent propagandistic undertones embedded in this widely circulated tabloid newspaper become the claimed independent opinions of a considerable amount of the population. This can be seen in the upsurge in the popularity of the AfD, which is now the third most popular party in Germany, obtaining 12.6% of the entire vote in the 2017 Bundestag elections. So, why am I suggesting that this seemingly underlying feminist tone of protecting women from sexual violence by the right-wing media is inauthentic? This question will be tackled through three major arguments. Firstly, right and far-right movements have a record of anti-feminist positions, and movements such as the AfD and their policies for gender equality simply do not call for female emancipation, to say the least. This is supported by Alexander Häusler when discussing the new right in Germany. He writes, Die fundamentalistische neue Rechte tritt deutlich aggressiver mit einem expliziten Antifeminismus auf. This quotation furthermore implies that impressions of implicit anti-feminism are characteristic of the right in general. Secondly, the same media coverage is not given to all women who are victims of sexual violence, especially in cases where the perpetrators are white native men. For example, the German federal police have reported that they count more than 7,300 reported rapes and sexual assaults in Germany every year, not to mention those that are never reported. If the right-wing media did support women's rights, why aren't they continually reporting about the 20 sexual assaults that occur every single day? Why aren't we seeing a more balanced representation of the plight of German women at the hands of misogynistic coercion when these perpetrators are not immigrants? I would suggest this is due to the far right disguising themselves as being supportive of feminist causes, as it fails to consistently expose wider issues of sexual violence towards women. Thirdly, I would argue the far right only supports white native women within the discourse of women's rights. In the AfD political campaign poster Mehr Sicherheit für unsere Frauen und Töchter, the explicit use of unsere propagates the notion of us and them, which, as I mentioned earlier, is another process of othering immigrants or non-natives of Germany. Female migrants or racialized individuals are not included in this strict subcategory of women. Additionally, one could argue sexual violence against migrant women is rarely voiced in the German right-wing media. This notion in itself is anti-feminist, as feminism seeks to protect the rights of all women in society, and is not exclusive to white German women. In a paper that explores the far-right movement in Sweden, Molinari and Nergard have pointed out that the movement argues that because the national characteristic of Sweden is gender equality, Muslims are a serious threat to the nation. This concept of Muslims being anti-feminist is not limited to the political climate in Sweden, and feeds directly into the far-right populist movement rhetoric in Germany. This is interesting as they argue that the patriarchal behaviour of Islamic men is the fundamental motivation to attack women. But how can that be so when sexual violence in Germany is such a threatening issue in general? This is not limited to the actions of Islamic men. In fact, Occidental culture is innately patriarchal and is one of the most challenging issues we face today. As I'm sure we are aware, sexual violence occurs irrespective of religion or culture. Another reason why I believe that they have used this unsere when referring to Frauen und Töchter is because it implies male ownership of these women, which is another way in which this poster is patriarchal. Thirdly, finally, I intend to expose some of these misogynistic undertones that are concealed through examining further articles from Bild. It cannot be denied that within these articles there is a considerable amount of language used to reduce female victims to their bodies and to portray them as weak or even helpless. This is shown in the article we saw earlier, Article 1. The journalist writes that the perpetrators grabbed them by the breasts and in intimate areas. Finally, also, in Article 3, the journalist writes that the helpless victim was grabbed by her waist, buttocks, hips, and also her chest. The explicit mention of the individual body parts that were groped is redundant here and only reinforces the gender binary. I would suggest that although the message of these articles is skillfully disguised as standing up for women's rights, the language that is used regarding women exposes sexist tendencies. Also, I believe the right-wing media, perhaps subconsciously, aims to restrict women to their projected role in society by the repetitive mention of their bodies. This is directly related because the AfD and Die Neue Rechte in general aim to increase the the native birth rate combined with the rejection of immigrants as a solution to supporting the ageing population. This can be seen in the political campaign posted by the AfD, Neue Deutsche, machen wir selber. This is supported by Alexander Häusler as he writes that die Geschlechtspolitik dieser beiden Strömungen, der neuen Rechte, ist geprägt durch eine bevölkerungsbiologische Sichtweise, wonach eine zu geringe Geburtenrate nicht durch Einwanderung, sondern nur durch eine größere Geburtenrate Deutscher zu erreichen sei. Therefore, I think it is the intention of the right-wing media to use language around the body to remind German women of their biological difference and what they must be responsible for. I believe To conclude, I aim to summarise my argument that the right-wing media is inconsistent with its values concerning women and feminism, as incidents of sexual violence are purely used to incite xenophobia and anti-immigration bias. I aim to draw attention to such a phenomenon of claiming false values for the aim of political persuasion because of the recent rise of the far right in Germany and the wider global context. I think it is important to highlight the hypocrisy and inauthenticity in these movements and campaigns, because I believe in the age of mass media, it is becoming more difficult to find impartiality in the mainstream press, and therefore individuals must be equipped to recognise such inconsistencies. To conclude,